Welcome to Reclaim, a podcast for women, by women, on conversations that matter. I am your host, Thais Sky, international speaker, teacher, and a certified life coach currently working to become a licensed psychotherapist in the state of California. Join me here every week as I offer thoughts and interviews on what it means to reclaim your humanness in this messy world. Hello, all of you brilliant, beautiful beings. Welcome to Reclaim the podcast. I'm Thais Sky. I'm a host, and we're here in 2020. Can you believe it? It is only the first week of 2020, and the world is already going to shit. It is a scary time to be alive right now, and yet we must find hope, we must find meaning, we must move forward. We cannot fall too deeply into despair, for there is so much that needs to be done, that needs us to step forward, to step in, to lean in, to take action. And I gotta tell you, I'm feeling really excited about the projects that are coming up in my life in 2020 and all of the things that are going to unfold in this new year, which starts with this podcast. I've been struggling a little bit, as I've shared with you all, about my vision for this podcast. And it took having a coffee date with my friend Zach for me to realize that, my initial vision for this podcast back in inception in 2018, 2018, 2017, I don't even remember when this podcast was incepted. Oh boy. All right, here we go. Thais is off on the deep end. When I first came up with the concept of Reclaim the podcast, I wanted to have conversations that mattered. And for me, I envisioned having multiple guests on at the same time. So if you go all the way back to episodes 1 through, I want to say 20, there were various conversations where I had 2 simultaneous guests. And the reason why I wanted to do it this way is because I wanted it to be a conversation. I didn't want it to be just me interviewing somebody. But then it started to get really complicated. Guests didn't like what the other guest had to say and didn't want to be associated with the podcast, with that conversation. Different guests felt like they had to overdo the other one. Like they were kind of getting into this competitive circle about wanting to be seen as the more successful one than the other guest. I mean, it just became a little messy. And so I kind of slowly moved away from that concept and fell into the rhythm of Reclaim of the past year of doing interviews. And I love interviews. I love using this platform to uplift the voices of women who are doing amazing work in the world. I love interviews, but it's just not exciting me right now. I'm actually incredibly bored by the idea of doing another goddamn interview. I just feel like there's so many podcasts that do interviews. I'm just over it. And the conversation with Zach reminded me of my initial mission, which is to have more conversations. And it made me think of all of the amazing episodes I've launched with my dear friend Lindsay Ray, where we recorded in her closet. I think it's 5 different segments on you're waking up to your white privilege, now what? And just so many incredible conversations. And I just miss that energy. And while Lindsay and I, our schedules have become so completely overwhelmed that we haven't been able to meet up to do more episodes, it's okay, because now I know that that's the energy I want for 2020. I want either solo episodes where I get to share my heart with you about what's going on and so maybe support you, give you words of wisdom, words of support to navigate the world in a meaningful way. Or I want to have more roundtable conversations, live in-person conversations with friends who are doing amazing things. But it's not just about doing the amazing things in the world. It's the content, the ideas that are generated through a lively conversation that I think really has the power to move the needle forward. Okay, so having said that, this episode is going to be a solo episode on a topic that I've received a lot of feedback on. Something that I wrote on Instagram that I think we need to explore a little bit more. And what better platform than this podcast? Okay, so this is what I wrote. I actually wrote this December 20th of 2017, but I reshared it recently on Instagram. And I write, today's shower thought. Telling people to only focus on what they can control doesn't teach people how to navigate what they can't control, which ultimately leads people to try to control what they can't control. Oh, so telling people to focus only on what they can control. This is something that we get a lot in the self-development world, right? We get this narrative a lot of focus on what you can control. And the reason why we get that very well-meaning piece of advice is because so often if we lose track, if we look away, what we find is that we're doing a lot of attempting to control what we can't control, right? We can't control the weather. We can't control other people's behaviors. We can't control what's going to happen tomorrow with our president, at least not overtly. There's a lot that we can't control. And if we spend too much energy focusing on what we can't control, we diminish our capacity to do something in our lives, to focus on what we can control and change those things. This is particularly true about people's behavior. Oh my gosh, there have been so many times throughout my life where I've looked at my different partners at the time, or different friends, or different relationships. Let's just put the blanket slate of relationship, right? I've looked at my different relationships in my life and I've thought, if only you would be just a little bit different, life would be so much better. Have you ever thought that towards your partner? I know that it's insidious and we don't want to admit that we think this way, but come on, we so do. There's so many times where we think, if they could just be different, if they could just do things differently, oh, life would be so much better. Things would flow smoother. It could be as simple as if they were to just put the toilet seat down, or just do the laundry without me asking them to, or just clean up after themselves. This is also particularly true for those of you who have children. If they just were not this sensitive, if they just were a little bit more like this, then everything would be easier. Okay, so we spend a lot of time trying to control other people's behavior, and other people's behavior falls smack dab in the middle of things that we cannot control. And so when we spend all this time and energy and effort changing, or attempting to change, or attempting to manipulate, or attempting to, God knows, do whatever to change other people's behaviors, what happens? We end up kind of losing sight of what's important. We lose sight of what's real. We lose sight of what's in our hearts, which is what we can control, which is in the realm of things that are within our control. Okay, so it's important for us to discern what we can't control and what we can control. Sometimes I use the language of what's mine and what's not mine. This is particularly true when we're talking about boundaries. What is mine to take on here and what is not mine to take on here? This person is putting a lot of emotions onto me. Which is valid and is mine to take on and admit and claim as my own? And what is this person's projecting onto me, right? What is mine? What is not mine? It helps to understand what can I control, what can't I control. It's quite incredible how we attempt to control other people. One of the most powerful ways that we attempt to control and manipulate other people is people pleasing. Now, when you think of people pleasing, you may not think of control. You may think, I'm just trying to get liked, but it's a form of manipulation, right? Because you're contorting yourself. You're wearing a mask. You're trying to be nice. You're playing nice. You're not truly being your authentic self in efforts for this person to like you. That is a way of controlling the other person's perception of you. Something that, again, is outside of your control. We cannot change how other people perceive us, because how they perceive us is built on so much that's not us. It's built on their past experience, their lived experience, how people have treated them, how they see the world, etc. And when we do the whole people-pleasing thing, I mean, so much of it is a way of trying to get our needs met. It's very valid. I'm a huge people-pleaser, and I talk a lot about people-pleasing in Worthy Women Rise, because this is very much the women who are attracted to my work are people-pleasers. And it's important to be real with ourselves. The people-pleasing, while it's a very valid coping mechanism, it's also can be extremely manipulative, and it can be hurtful, and it's unfair. It's unfair because the people that are in our lives want all of us, not just a version of us that we want, that we think that they want, right? Okay. So, telling people to focus on what they can control, while I can understand the validity of that, and I just proved that for the past 5 minutes, right? It doesn't teach people how to navigate what they can't control. And that needs to be a part of the conversation. How do you navigate what you can't control? If we know that we can't control other people's behaviors, that's one thing. But then what do we do? What do we do when we know that we can't try to change their minds, and yet everything within us is telling us to people please, to try to manipulate them, to try to get them to like us, right? So we need to focus on what we can. Of course, that needs to be a part of the conversation, but I don't think that that means that then we have to ignore what we can't control. I think instead the invitation is to learn how to be with the complexity and the discomfort of what we can't control. And I think this perfectly is in alignment with what's happening in the world right now. It is a shitstorm out in the world, and there is a lot that we can't control, at least not overtly. Maybe over the long period of time, subtle or smaller actions, behaviors, these things can definitively change things in the long term, right? For example, climate change. What can one individual do? Well, there's a lot that we can do. Small changes that we can make every day, small decisions that we can make every day that can lead to a greater shift in how we approach and how we understand our relationship with the world, our relationship with Earth, et cetera, et cetera. There are ways that we can vote for representatives who have similar beliefs to us. There's ways that we can use our platforms, the social media, etc., to elicit change. There's a lot that we can do, okay, in the grand scheme of things. But in the moment of crisis, in the moment when we look at the news and we are like, fuck, Australia is burning right now. Or fuck, our president is attempting to go into another war. Or, oh, fuck, climate change is killing, endangering my way of life. I mean, all of these crises land us in a really deep way, and it can be really overwhelming. And we're forced to really sit with emotions that we've been attempting to disown and diminish and push down for a very long time. Emotions like hopelessness. Hopelessness is one of those emotions that as children, we did not know how to embody. We did not know how to understand hopelessness, because if we admit that we're hopeless, then there's nothing we can do. It's a very big feeling. And so as children, we typically diminish hopelessness and attempt to find hope in different ways, which is why you could argue that faith is so important for humanity. Faith is in many ways a counteract to hopelessness. And it's beautiful. Having faith, having hope, having dreams, having visions, having action, all of those things that are very, very important. We're not taking that away. What we're doing in this conversation is we're holding the complexity of both things, that we can have faith and hopelessness. And in fact, feeling into our hopelessness is critical to entering into our depths. Now, often when I say this with my clients, the response is, well, I'm afraid that if I open myself up to hopelessness, I'm going to be in this forever. So many of my clients are terrified that if they open themselves up to hopelessness, they're going to be depressed forever. They're not going to be able to navigate the world, and they're not going to be able to get out of a bed. This is very valid. This is very real. Hopelessness is one of those feelings that is very overwhelming, and it makes a lot of sense that the reason why we've been diminishing it and pushing it down is because we are afraid that if we open up to it, it's going to take over. Having said that, my loves, we know, if we have been paying attention, that diminishing ourselves only breaks off and splinters parts of ourselves and prevents us from stepping into our wholeness. We know, at least consciously, at least mentally, or at least you do now, that it is so important for us to own every facet of the human condition. And that includes our hopelessness, our despair. That includes our grief, our sadness, our sense of loss, and our not knowing what to do. These are parts of our human experience that is not only valid, but it is calling for us to feel. Because only as we allow ourselves to feel these things, to feel the despair, can we open ourselves up to all of who we are. It gives us meaning, it gives us depth, it gives us a way to ground ourselves in the human experience. I see the people out there who are just pretending like none of this dark stuff is happening. And all I see is deeply afraid children who are afraid of the dark, right? I don't see an empowered human, because an empowered human doesn't deny reality in attempts to live in fantasy. We are allowed to have fantasy, just like we are allowed to have hope. We are allowed to have dreams. We're allowed to discern and focus on what we want. Those things are allowed. And if it's coming at the cost of what's real, if it's coming at the cost of the crises in the world, the crises of our brothers and sisters and siblings and other humans, if it comes at that cost, I don't want anything to do with it. Okay? So how do we navigate what we can't control? By giving ourselves permission to feel all of it, the despair, the hopelessness, the fear, the angst. But don't stay there. Whenever we stay in an emotion, it means that we're feeding it stories. It means we're no longer feeling, we are now going into the narrative. Staying in an emotion, believe it or not, is not actually feeling an emotion. So let yourself be in the despair. Breathe into it. Let it break your heart. Let yourself feel. But do not stay there. Do not stay there. Emotions are meant to move through us. Wherever it gets stuck, it's probably touching into something from a deep wounded place within you. And then that's where getting the support is important. That's where bringing in the community is important. That's where reaching out for co-regulation is important, right? Self-regulation is important, and so is co-regulation. Again, how do we navigate what we can't control, which is a very important part of the equation? Focus on what we can control and learn how to navigate what we can't. How do we learn how to navigate what we can't? By feeling the lack of control. Instead of pushing ourselves against our lack of control and trying to focus on what we can control, let ourselves feel out of control. When I was healing from binge eating disorder, and bulimia and whatever else, one of the things that was very real for me was that binging felt out of control. And the binging was an act of feeling out of control, where the deprivation that I was doing and the calorie counting and the words. Where are my words here? When I would deprive myself of food, that felt like I was in control, right? And then the binging would occur as an effect of the deprivation, which then felt out of control. It was like a part of me that was bad was coming out and could not be controlled. And so the answer to that was to be even more in control. And many, many people theorize that underneath eating disorders is a lack of control and wanting to control something. At least we have control over this body, right? And so the answer then isn't to continue to focus on what you can't control. The answer to an eating disorder is not to continue to exacerbate these beliefs that you need to control your body to defense against the uncontrollable. No, the healing of eating disorder comes from opening up slowly through healing work, through the right support system, through all of the things, slowly opening up to the possibility that you can be okay with things not being in your control. Yeah? Okay. So again, it is so critical for our rise that we can withstand things feeling out of control and not to push away the subsequent feelings. Drop into those feelings. Let yourself be in those feelings, and then do not stay there. Let yourself move, those feelings move through you so you can open up your awareness, and then you can decide how you want to move forward, grounded in both what you can control and what's out of your control. Wherever there is an orientation of really obsessing over what you can't control, it's because you feel out of control. Okay? So then the response to that is to see if you can notice how it feels to be out of control. The more we can give ourselves the space to feel all of the complexities, the more we start to realize that nothing really, truly is within our control. And that is okay. That is our power source. But I'm getting myself ahead of myself here. Let's take it one step at a time. Okay? So some things that we can do is we can spend some time in reflection. If that's helpful to you, to reflect, like where are you Where are you feeling out of control right now? What feels out of control? And then notice what it elicits within you. What is the feeling and how does it feel in your body? Really see if you can bring it into your body. What is here? What is in your heart? How are you feeling? And see if you can sit there with that as your meditation. Allow all things that you cannot control in as you inhale. And then maybe we can even move this into a Tonglen meditation where as you exhale, you can use a mantra like, and I am safe here, right? I am okay with not needing to control. Okay? I hope this was useful to you. I am in this grief of this breaking world with all of you. I have hope and I have hopelessness. Both are alive within me. And I'm sending you my love as you navigate these complexities alongside me. We are in this together, and I'm honored to be here with all of you for a year that we have no idea what's in store. We have no idea what's coming, but we do have each other and we have this moment. And let us right now, in this second, let that be enough. I'm looking forward to being with you every single week this year. If things go according to plan, according to my great big plans for my podcast. For those of you who have been listening since the very beginning, I bow to you. Thank you for being here. For every single one of you who support this podcast on Patreon, thank you, thank you, thank you. Especially since I don't give anything back on Patreon, I just ask for your support. I am so deeply honored by every single one of you who have donated even just $1 to Patreon. And if you feel called to do so, you can go to patreon.com/Thais Sky. It would just be such an honor for you to support this podcast. Every dollar that you give goes directly back to making this podcast the best podcast it can be. I love all of you, and I'll talk to you soon. Thank you for listening to Reclaim the Podcast. This podcast represents the opinions of Thais Sky and her guests to the show. The content of this podcast are for informational and educational purposes only and is not intended to be a substitute for professional psychological, psychiatric, or medical advice, diagnosis, or treatment. Always seek the advice of your physician or other qualified mental health provider with any questions you may have regarding a medical condition or mental disorder.